Since the release with the Asian dynasties, Japanese have always been a polarizing civilization. With a powerful unit roster and a defensive economic focused playstyle where you don't have to secure as much map control as other civilizations, a lot of people started loving Japan. For the same reasons, a big part of the community always hated the beginner-friendly playstyle of Japanese. Oh, and also a shogun running into your base, receiving shipments and spawning 10 mortarus near your factory also certainly didn't help Japan's popularity. But how good are Japanese today, and what things are there to keep in mind while playing as them or against them? Hello, I'm Andy, and let's find out in this civilization's overview. First, let's talk about the unique features about the Japanese civilization. Japanese, like all Asian civilizations, use wonders to advance to the next age. Japanese have a low maximum villager population of only 75 villagers. The only civilization which can train less villagers is Dutch. In addition to that, the Japanese villagers cannot hunt, and at the start of the game they can only gather food from cherry orchards and berries. This means, depending on the map, Japanese have access to 7,000 to 12,000 food and natural resources without the need for herding. Their two explorers can use the recall ability to get quickly out of combat and to your TC. Because of those two monk explorers, Japan has one of the best treasure collecting in the entire game. In addition to that, the explorers can build shrines on the map, typically around animals. The Japanese house equivalent, the shrines, provide population, produce resources, attract nearby hunts and livestock, and also give more resources if animals are gathering at the shrine. Now that we've covered the basics of the Japanese civilization, let's quickly get into the home city. Japanese can send all of the unit and resource shipments twice. All team cards and most upgrades can only be sent once, except sawmills, fish market and silversmith. Let's take a look at some specific noteworthy cards. Japanese can get a strong boom with their villager and fishing boat cards, especially the 4 and 7 villager cards. They can send both those cards twice and thus can get a massive eco spike if they want to. Japanese have access to the unique building, the dojo. Dojos produce units continuously and are worth roughly 0.75 factories per dojo. Generally, producing yumis gives you the highest value, while producing yabusami gives you the lowest value. The difference isn't too big though, so training what you need is definitely a decent choice. The dojos can be used in supremacy and are better in some circumstances than 7 villagers, because you're not exhausting natural resources, and in this way you delay your transition to rice paddies. You also can achieve a higher total economy once you reach 75 villagers, but in most circumstances 7 villagers is more flexible, less clunky to use, and gives you a better immediate boost. In GT, dojos aren't used because they take 2 deck slots and the units also would have to walk to the front line. Now let's talk about the economic upgrades. They have all the economic upgrades available and also additional rice paddy upgrades. In addition to that, because they can send fish markets twice, the fishing boats are also among the best fishing boats in the entire game. The only real downside to having this many economic upgrades is that Japanese still only have 75 villagers, so those economic upgrades will affect less villagers than other civilizations. But their individual gather rate of a villager is among the highest in the entire game. In addition to that, they do have impactful team economic cards, namely the Chonindo card, which improves the gather rate of all your villagers and all the fishing boats in the entire team. This makes Chonindo arguably the most powerful team economic card, because it can be used in a wide variety of situations and will affect a huge amount of units. Another good team card is the 3 fishing boats, which can give a nice economic boost to your team on water maps. Now that we've covered the cards, let's talk about units and the army composition. First off, I will start with the infantry. Japanese can train ashigarus, yumis and samurais in their barracks. Compared to normal musketeers, ashigarus are faster and stronger, but also a more expensive type of musketeer. They are population efficient, but not cost efficient until you can start stacking up the upgrades in the mid to late game. The extra speed on Ashigarus means that you can raid pretty effectively with them, because they can only be chased down by pikes or by cavalry. This means while retreating you take a lot less shots of skirmishers and musketeers, and also pikes and cavalry are generally not used against musketeers because they trade very ineffectively. The next unit is the Yumi, which is a good archer with a great attack animation. This means that Yumis can hit and run, which most archers effectively can't. To balance the fact out, Yumis have a lower rate of fire than most other archers, but they still have great DPS and are among the best archers in the entire game. Samurai is a melee infantry unit which is decent at killing buildings and cavalry while also being a bit faster than most other units, but it's still melee infantry, and melee infantry is only really a situational unit type which you don't build your army around usually. For the cavalry they can use the Naginata riders and the Yabusames. Naginata are better against light infantry than Hussar and has more ranged HP, but it's worse against everything else. Think of the Naginata as a Lancer light type unit. It is a great unit against skirmishers and archers and can take a lot of ranged fire, but it is worse against everything else. You can block it easily with musketeers, melee infantry or any sort of cavalry. The ranged cavalry Yabusame do have low HP, have high range resist, have a higher range and higher multiplier versus artillery. This means they are better in dragoon fights and they do a lot of damage against artillery, but they are worse at doing everything else, especially at dealing with melee cavalry. Another downside to the Yabusame is that they are very expensive to get with 150 coin per Yabusame. They are still the best ranged cavalry against artillery and especially for Japan their best answer against artillery, at least in the early to mid game. Next up we have the Japanese artillery, which can be trained in the castle. The Flaming Arrow is a mix of culverins and falconets, which has a low HP but does decent damage against artillery and infantry. It has 2 more range compared to falconets, so in theory they can snipe them. In practice it is very hard, because of the attack delay and the fact that you need 3 shots to kill a falconet, but you get killed by 2 falconet hits. With Imperial upgrades, the Flaming Arrow gets another +2 range, so then it is a real counter versus artillery. The second artillery piece is the Mortaru. It is a mortar which is used to clean up buildings and ships. It is one of the best mortars in the entire game because of the cheaper cost, higher mobility and higher range. Now that we've covered the base units, let's talk about the special units, which are available in the Wonder, Consulate or in the Homecity. The daimyos and shoguns are accessible in the Homecity and they can be retrained if they die in the Tokugawa Shogunate Wonder. They can be used as a shipment point or to train units. Daimyos can train barracks and stable units, and the shogun can train yamabushis, shinobis, flaming arrows and mortarus. Daimyos and shoguns especially can turn the enemy economy into a battlefield in no time if not dealt with, because they can receive those shipments and can train units. They also do have great aura buffs, which improves the attack and the HP of your army. So oftentimes you will see them standing behind the army and retraining units and providing support. In the Consulate and at the Shogun they can also train the Yamabushi, which is a fast melee infantry with strong building attack and high damage versus cavalry, so it's basically a pikeman on steroids. The Shinobi is a staff archer with high damage against buildings. It can also be trained at the Shogun and in the Consulate, and it is most often used as a scouting unit or to raid. Now that we've covered the units, let's talk about army compositions. In Commerce Age, typically you will see Ashigarus and Naginatas, or Ashigarus and Yumis, or you can also mix Yumis and Yamabushis. Samurais are often not a unit you want to make in Age 2. If you want to go for an anti-cav building attack, you should aim for a build order with Yamabushis or Ashigarus. If you prefer to play defensive, oftentimes you want to get more Yumis, and if you want to play more aggressive, you oftentimes get more Ashigarus out. In Fortress Age or in late game, you do have the same army compositions as in Age 2, except that you can add flaming arrows to any of the army composition, or you can add Yabasume if you expect artillery. Another viable army composition at this point is also Yumi Yabusame. What the best army composition is depends on the enemy and also is completely out of the scope of this video. Generally, you want to have an infantry corps with Japanese, so Ashigarus and Yumis, and you want to add some cavalry if needed or some artillery if needed. Like all Asian civilizations, the Japanese have access to 5 wonders and 4 consulate allies, which will I now cover in detail. For wonders, we have the Toshugo Shrine, which improves the gather rates of all your shrines and also provides 20 population space. Upon completion, it will give export. Usually it is best used as an H2 H-up, since there you benefit the most from the population space and the economic bonus. The Buddha statue has the ability to reveal the enemy players. Also spawns Naginata riders and their cherry orchard wagons after H-up. It is hard to quantify the value of this wonder. Of course, having a map hack temporarily is very nice and you can get a lot of information in some cases, but in other cases you won't get any new information. Also, it doesn't give you any value or any resources or army which helps you defend or kill an enemy. In addition to that, the cherry orchard wagon can be pretty useful in some situations. The Golden Pavilion improves your military units with one of the following 4 options, which can be switched at any time. These options are ranged attack, melee attack, HP and speed. All these options are useful in certain situations. Typically you want to use ranged attack when you have a Yumi heavy composition, like Yumi Ashigaru or Yumi Yabusame. When having a lot of Naginata riders, flaming arrows or melee units in general, then using the HP option is best. HP is also the go-to option in late game and GT, since all units benefit from it. Basically, if you are in doubt, then use the HP option. Speed is a good option if you are active on the map, during raids for example. The melee attack mode is very niche and for the memes, basically if you are going for samurais or Naginata samurais or something like that. In addition to that, the Golden Pavilion also has the advanced arsenal upgrades and spawns Yumis when completed. In most builds you use the Golden Pavilion to age up to Fortress Age. Next up we have the Tokugawa Shogunate. This wonder reduces the train time and cost of your military units, and also gives you the option to retrain daimyos and shoguns. It also gives an XP bonus when completed, and also in later ages spawns a daimyo. Usually used as a age-up to Industrial or Imperial Age, but also can be used in an aggressive fast fortress build order. The last Japanese wonder is the Torii Gates. This gives an XP trickle and improves almost all ways of getting XP, so for example combat, construction and training. Once you finish building the Torii Gates, you spawn a military rickshaw and also some samurais. This wonder is often used in aggressive build orders to advance to H2 because of the military wagon and the samurai you get. In late game scenarios, so for example in GT, you usually want to get all the wonders except the Buddha. Also, Japanese wonders are even more important than factory, so keeping them alive is key. In the Consulate, Japanese can choose between the 4 allies: Portuguese, Japanese Isolation, Dutch or Spain. Each ally gives you a passive bonus and allows you to spend your export on upgrades or units. The Portuguese reduce the cost of your buildings, including the food cost of your wonders. You can also train crossbows and have the option to go for 3 fishing boats, a caravel and a mortar ship. Allying with Portuguese is good for booming, since you can get shrines for 107 wood, and combined with Heavenly Kami for only 75 wood. In addition, the crossbows are good in the early game and help you defend against early pressure. On water maps, the 3 fishing boats can give a nice early boost to your boom. Japanese Isolation improves the attack of all your units passively. You can also train Yamabushi clubmen, shinobis, ninjas and Hatamato samurais. Notable upgrades are the 1 military rickshaw and Bushido principles, which enables you to train 10 units with each badge. Japanese Isolation is good when you want to be aggressive early, since you can get clubmen shinobis or get access to a military rickshaw. If you are maxed out and want to attack, it often makes sense to switch to Japanese Isolation before the attack, for the extra attack buff on all your units. Also, ninjas can be devastating if someone uses mercenaries, like Mamelukes. Hatamato samurais is the strongest melee infantry in the game, which destroys anything it reaches, but it's also slow and very expensive. With the Dutch ally, you receive a small coin trickle. Dutch have musketeers, reiters and mortars, and they also give you access to European buildings, like the church, bank, arsenal and a livestock pen. Often you switch to Dutch in the middle and late game, for the upgrades in the European buildings and to train livestock, which gather additional resources at your shrine. The Consulate ally Spain gives a passive XP trickle and also gives you upgrades relating to your shipments. You can train pikes, rodeleros, falconets and lancers. In Supremacy they are rather niche, but in late game their lancers and falconets can be a good addition to your army. So we've talked a lot about the different aspects of the Japanese. Now let's give a little summary on how good they are. And to do this I want to take a look at the three categories: early game, booming and late game. First off, the early game. Japanese are pretty weak in the early game and vulnerable to rushes, traditionally against Russia or for example Aztec. This is mainly because your villagers can't hunt and you subsequently do have less resources than normal civilizations. Shrines usually don't make up that difference up early in the game, especially since you also lack the 3 villager shipments. Your units are also more expensive at the start of the game and not that cost efficient. You also do not have access to powerful H2 shipments, so for example 700 resources, 5 villagers or 3 settler wagons, 5 Cossacks or 2 leather cannons. There are some build orders where you can also play aggressive, mainly involving Torii gates, but it is not traditionally the strong point of Japanese. The only real saving grace in this category is the 2 explorers, which save some villager seconds by building shrines and also minimize the economic gap by allowing you to get more treasures than other civilizations. Their booming potential though is really strong. With Portuguese consulate allies and heavenly kami they can plant down shrines for only 75 wood and can get to a decent economy really fast. On land you can achieve 20 shrines usually in under 10 minutes, and if untouched this boom has around the same strength as British or a Dutch boom. They also have access to 2x4 and 2x7 villagers, and on water even more fishing boats with 2x3, 2x5 and 2x8 fishing boats. So if untouched they will have a really strong economy, and in addition to that powerful units which become more cost efficient the more upgrades you stack on them. They practically also never run out of H1, H2 or H3 cards, because they can send most of their shipments twice. The Japanese late game economy is very cost efficient and powered by their shrines and by their abundance of economy cards. Their total gathering potential is average though, because they only have 75 villagers and no factories. This gets balanced out with wonders and shrines, but overall an average European civilization with 99 villagers has a higher income overall. Another advantage Japan has is that their upgrades are cheaper, so they don't need to gather as many resources as most other civilizations. Combined with the higher army capacity, 125 population space for your army, and their overall population efficient units like Ashigarus, Yumis, Yabusame and Mortars, means that they should overwhelm the enemy in the late game and trade more cost efficient. And this balances the fact that they have a slightly worse economy. Also, the daimyos and shogun can easily be used to run around and delete enemy trading posts, or even snipe enemy economy if there are holes in the walls, or the enemy is distracted. People who play the Asian dynasties have probably experienced it at least once when a shogun pops 10 mortarus near your factories and your economy vanishes in a matter of minutes. So now my closing thoughts about the Japanese. Japanese excel at booming and are strongest in their mid and late game, so between 10 and 25 minutes. They are most vulnerable in the early game, where the expensive units, no access to hunts and the lack of powerful shipments puts them behind other civilizations. This means you're often forced into a defensive playstyle. Luckily though, Japanese don't need to hurt, which means they are hard to raid and easy to play. For Japan, there are some strategies to play aggressively, mainly involving Torii Gate build orders or using the Japanese isolation consulate option. But typically their game plan is to get a boom going, so you can rely on the powerful Ashi, Yumi, Naginata army composition to finish off opponents. If the boom is not disturbed enough in the early game, they are almost unstoppable in the mid game. All in all, Japanese are a powerful competitive civilization in all game modes, with a unique playstyle and a lot of options to choose from. These are just my thoughts about the Japanese. What are your thoughts about the Japanese? Let me know in the comments. At this point I want to give a shout out to top 10 supremacy player Harcha for proofreading my script and adding some great insights to it. He has a channel and a Twitch stream where he occasionally streams, so I will link it and check him out if you are interested. Also, this video took a long time to produce. I had to revise my script like 3 times myself. So if you like this kind of content, let me know in the comments. Also let me know which civilization you want to see covered. And also consider supporting this channel by liking, commenting and subscribing to it. Thanks for watching and see you guys around. Bye bye!